Good evening and welcome to ScaldNet 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I am joined today by Huw Marshall, who is a digital advisor and also the founder of a news platform, Talking Wales. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Very well. For our first story, we've got the Ukraine update, day 874 of the conflict. On Monday, President Zelensky said that Russia should be represented at a second peace summit in November, after a first summit convened by the Ukrainian president last month in Switzerland, to which Moscow was not invited. Both sides have shunned direct peace talks since negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian delegations fell through in the early weeks of Russia's invasion in February 2022. During a press conference in Kiev after his visit to the US from NATO Defense Alliance summit, Zelensky opened the door to direct talks with officials from Moscow. In the same news conference, Zelensky said Ukraine needs 25 Patriot air defense systems to fully defend its airspace, adding that he also wants Western partners to send more F-16 warplanes than those already pledged. A 6-month delay in military assistance from the US, the biggest single contributor to Ukraine, meant that Kiev's forces had lost the initiative in the front line, Zelensky said. Top EU officials will boycott informal meetings hosted by Hungary while the country has the EU's rotating presidency, after Hungary's pro-Russian Prime Minister Viktor Orban held a series of rogue meetings with foreign leaders about Ukraine and angered European partners. A highly unusual decision to have a European Commission president and other top officials of a body boycott the meeting was made in light of recent developments marking the start of the Hungarian EU presidency. According to Commission spokesperson Eric Mamer, posting on social media. US journalist and author Masha Gessen was convicted in absentia on Monday by a Moscow court on charges of spreading false information about the military and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The Moscow-born Gessen, a staff writer for the New Yorker and a columnist for the New York Times, who lives in the US, is a prominent critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin and an award-winning writer. A Ukraine drone attack sparked a fire at a factory producing electrical devices and components in Russia's Kursk region, which borders Ukraine, according to Alexei Smirnov, the interim governor of the region. On Monday, a Russian military court granted house arrest to a general and former commander in Moscow's Ukraine offensive who has been charged with fraud. Major General Ivan Popov was released from behind bars after being arrested in May on suspicion of large-scale fraud, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Ukraine has said that a military serviceman who was alleged to be attempting to flee the country illegally had been shot dead by a border guard after being caught and detained. The State Bureau of Investigation, SBI, said 4 servicemen were apprehended while approaching the Moldovan border by foot in the southern Ukrainian region of Odessa on Sunday. Now, Huw Marshall, passing over to you, what are your thoughts of the ongoing Ukraine conflict?
Yeah, it's slightly worrying with what's happening in the states at the moment. Obviously, we've had what happened to Trump over the weekend, but the announcement of JD Vance as his running mate, and he is one of the most sort of outspoken, not anti-Ukraine, but sort of one of the sort of major appeasers. So that's a concern towards the future. So I think it's more important than ever now that the UK and European countries step up to the plate to support Ukraine.
Thanks, you. For our next story, we've got the Israel and Gaza latest, where at least 38,713 Palestinians have been killed and 89,166 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October, according to a statement from the Gaza Health Ministry today. Israeli airstrikes have killed more than 60 Palestinians in southern and central Gaza, including one that hit an Israeli-declared safe zone, crowded with thousands of displaced people. The day's deadliest strike came on Tuesday afternoon, hitting near a fuel station outside the southern city of Khan Yunis in Muwasi, a coastal region that is part of a humanitarian safe zone, where the Israeli military has told Palestinians to take refuge to escape offensives elsewhere. At least 8 Palestinians were killed and several were wounded in an Israeli airstrike on a school in central Gaza today. Um, Gaza health officials have said. The strike hit Al Auda, a school in the Al Nusayrat camp, the ministry said. Israeli forces battled Hamas-led fighters in several areas across Gaza on Tuesday, while Palestinian health officials said at least 13 people were killed in Israeli bombardments in its southern and central areas. In Rafah, a southern border city where Israeli forces have been operating since May, 5 Palestinians were killed in an airstrike on a house, while in nearby Khan Yunis, a man, his wife, and 2 children were killed, they said. Several Palestinians were killed and wounded in an Israeli airstrike which was targeting a car in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza on Tuesday, Gaza health officials said. The airstrike hit near a tented area housing displaced families in Attar Street, the ministry said as well. And the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has used a meeting with 2 senior Israeli officials to voice concerns over the recent deadly strikes by Israel on the Gaza Strip. Israeli police said officers shot and killed a Palestinian after he stabbed a police officer in the occupied West Bank on Tuesday. Israeli air and naval strikes continued to pummel Gaza as the UK Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, repeated his call for a ceasefire during the visit to Jerusalem. Huw Marshall?
Yeah, again, it, everybody seems to be becoming numb to it all. It's just every day it's the same story, and lives being lost. There's no sign of any end to the war. How effective Israel's sort of military campaign is anymore is open to question. And one wonders if it's continuing just for the sake of keeping Netanyahu in his position. It's good people are calling for a ceasefire, but Netanyahu isn't listening. I think the only language he understands is if maybe the West, including the UK, stopped supplying him with arms. But yeah, it's heartbreaking. It is. Hearing stories about families who are being displaced. Now living on beaches in makeshift tents, having to make toilets, holes in the ground. They're being treated as subhuman, and it's hard to see, where the end is going to come from.
So from that, I'm guessing you're not seeing much hope in the Israeli stated mission of dismantling and destroying Hamas and only ending the conflict then.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to see because, like you say, I'm just thinking back. It must have been a month, 6 weeks when Hamas were down to the final battalion. But it's ongoing. There was the strike last week. There was supposed to be a pinpoint strike to try and take out one of the Hamas commanders, and it ended up killing 90 people, most of them women and children. So it's you see the pictures from Gaza, and it's just been completely destroyed. It's going to take years just to rebuild Gaza. It's the situation there is just completely broken.
Thank you, Hugh. Shifting our vision to the UK, where Labour refused to end the two-child cap ahead of a King's speech tomorrow. In the debate following tomorrow's King's speech, there is expected to be an amendment tabled, calling on the new Labour government to immediately put an end to the two-child cap and rape clause. Sir Keir Starmer has until now refused to act immediately to repeal the two-child cap and is expected to whip Labour MPs to vote down on any amendment put forward on the subject. The Labour position is that there has to be growth in the economy before it can act to end the two-child cap. Stephen Flynn MP warned the Labour government is choosing to push thousands of Scottish children into poverty and said it must take ownership of the misery it will cause as a result. The SNP Westminster leader confirmed his party will table an amendment to end the two-child cap and challenge Labour MPs in Scotland to vote for it or take responsibility for the child poverty they will be causing by failing to scrap the cap. It follows the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, confirming on BBC Breakfast Today that the UK government should not scrap the two-child cap in the King's speech. Commenting, SNP's Westminster leader Stephen Flynn said, "The Labour Party has failed its first big test in government. Instead of delivering change, it is choosing to push thousands of Scottish children into poverty. It is appalling and indefensible. Scrapping the two-child benefit cap is the bare minimum required to tackle child poverty. If Keir Starmer won't even take this baby step forward, it suggests his government is incapable of delivering the substantial action needed to eradicate child poverty." People in Scotland voted for fundamental change at Westminster, and instead they are getting the same old excuses and the same damaging cuts. The Labour government was serious about eradicating child poverty. It would scrap the cap immediately and match the SNP government's Scottish child payment UK-wide by raising the child element of universal credit by £26.70 per child per week across the UK. That was the quote from SNP leader Stephen Flynn. So Huw, how do you think this conversation will play out amongst Labour after the King's speech? Will this be a unanimous sort of thing, or will we see people coming out from Labour, maybe in Scottish Labour, pitching against the two-child cap? And also, if you have any thoughts on what we might see in the King's speech in general, then you can mention that as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously this is something that was discussed throughout the general election campaign. And one thing I've noticed in the last few days is quite interesting how the BBC were reporting this as that the SNP have all of a sudden, sort of decided to try and support, to try to get rid of the two-child cap, when it's actually been something that that's been driven by the SNP and supported by Plaid Cymru. It's going to be interesting because obviously you got 400 now Labour MPs, huge majority. They're going to be under pressure to keep discipline. But obviously, one of the issues I think Labour have with having such a huge intake is keeping those members disciplined. How will people like Diane Abbott vote? It's going to be quite interesting. But it's one of those things that I would imagine will pass quite clearly. Labour is just clearly taking the line of until there's growth, we're not doing anything. So. Yeah, it's disappointing, but not unexpected. And I say, with the rest of the King's speech, it sounds like from what I've read over the last couple of days, there are going to be no surprises in there. I think there's a few older bits of legislation that ran out of time before the general election that will be carried forward as well. So the anti-smoke, the tobacco ban, the incremental yearly ban on ages there, and the law following the Manchester Arena bombing to make sure that venues are safe. Those are going to go through. But yeah, it's going to be sort of pretty standard stuff. And to be fair to Labour, I think it's quite clear that in the last couple of weeks that they've inherited an almighty mess. I think Labour, just the fact that Labour are actually doing things, they've done more in the last 2 weeks than Conservatives have done in the last 5 years. It just shows, what were the Conservatives doing? They were just so busy infighting and, sort of focusing on small boats in Rwanda and getting sort of zero results, that they'd actually stopped functioning as a government. So I think it is quite a relief with the new government that it does seem to be one that's actually um, doing things and moving things forward. But I'm not expecting any surprises. But yeah, and it'll be quite um, not a negative sort of plan, but it'll be quite sort of boring, as you'd imagine,
Hmm.
because they haven't got the money to sort of bring anything new in. But it'll be good to get some sort of meat on the bone, because the Labour, in their election campaign, it was very light on detail of what they were actually going to do, over the next couple of years. So it'll be actually good to see that, and we can start measuring their impact properly.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the party maybe waiting first for growth, focusing on sort of this business aspect, and then bringing in policy. Do you think that's right in this case? Do you support delaying something like the two-child cap, or is this something that you would rather see happening now? Um, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it should be brought, because at the end of the day, it's not a huge amount of money that's required to do this. In Wales, from where I live in an old coal mining valley, the area that I live in, across the valleys where almost a third of the Welsh population live, a third of children live in poverty, and in some wards, it's one in two, and it's frankly disgraceful in this day and age. Where the UK is supposed to be one of the world's, something like the fourth biggest economy, and we've got children living in poverty. It just shouldn't be happening. So yeah, they should bring it in, and hopefully it'll be one of the first things they do once growth does seem to come in. But it does seem to look like, I think, Labour, whether it's luck, but it does look like the economy is going to improve, and improve slightly faster than expected. And I think just having competent government will make a difference to the economy as well. So, I think we have to hope for some growth in order for some spending to be done, because Labour are only going to have a short period of time, a short honeymoon period, because people still, they want to see the impact of how their lives are improving under Labour. We'll be talking about it in a minute, but we've had a Labour government in Wales for longer than you've had an SNP government in Scotland, and health and education, the two main devolved areas. The outcomes in Wales are worse than anywhere else in the UK. So it's a bit of a concern, showing, when Labour are in power, are they able to deliver?
Mm.
Um, you would argue that possibly, under Blair, that they did do that, and they were undone by the sort of global economic crash towards the end of Gordon Brown's tenure. But yeah, no, the honeymoon period is going to be very short.
Thank you, Hugh. And just like you said, our next story is the Welsh First Minister Vaughan Gething resigning. 4 months after being nominated as Wales's Labour leader and in turn the First Minister of the Welsh Parliament, Vaughan Gething has announced he is resigning from a position. Gething faced multiple controversies in his time as First Minister, one of which was a leaked text that appeared to show Gething advocating the deletion of text during the COVID pandemic, a claim he denied during the COVID inquiry. The main point of contention, however, was the £200,000 worth of donations made to Gething's leadership campaign, made by a company owned by David John Neal, who was given a 3-month suspended prison sentence in 2013 for illegally dumping waste on the environmentally sensitive Gwent levels in South Wales. In June, a motion of no confidence was tabled by the Tories and backed by Plaid Cymru and the Liberal Democrats. Vaughan Gething lost the confidence vote just 12 weeks after taking office, but vowed to carry on in his position as the vote is not legally binding. Today, however, his hand was forced by 4 ministers resigning from Welsh Government, all of them urging Gething to stand down, saying his position was untenable. Gething wrote, I have this morning taken the difficult decision to begin the process of stepping down as leader of a Welsh Labour Party and, as a result, First Minister. Having been elected as the leader of my party in March, I had hoped that over the summer a period of reflection, rebuilding, and renewal could take place under my leadership. I recognize now that this is not possible. Now, Huw Marshall was Geffing in the right for holding on to his position this long?
No, it's very sad, and it does go back to people's perception of Gething's integrity. He's right to say that he didn't break any rules, but as you mentioned, he accepted £200,000 donation from a convicted criminal, with convictions for environmental waste violations. And just to put it into context, the Jeremy Miles, who was standing up against him, I think he raised something like 40,000 pounds. So £200,000 from one source is a huge amount of money, and it gave Gething an edge. It allowed him to employ a large team of people who could, man phone banks and contact Labour members and those who'd be voting, in order to get his to get support. He won by a narrow margin, 51.5% to 48.5%, I think, against Jeremy Miles. But soon after, once the sort of revelation came out about the source of the donation, he just failed to recognise that there was any issue from an integrity perspective about accepting such a large donation from somebody with a criminal conviction. Had he done that, then none of this would have happened. He could have paid the money back. He could have said, "Yes, it was an error of judgment. I didn't break any rules, but I can see now how it can be perceived to be wrong." He failed to do that, and even today, in his resignation speech, he was still saying that he hasn't done anything in his time. His integrity is top of the uh, top of the list. But the facts are there. He was very unwise. That there has been an element, I think, from the media of a witch hunt from certain quarters, who basically just gone for him, um, and but he hasn't made his own life easy, and the way that he holds himself and conducts himself, his performances in the Senedd, especially last week, when Hannah Blythen was sat in the chamber for the first time. She'd been off, with not signed off as being unwell after the leak of the I think it was an iMessage, and his demeanor, is very unfortunate. He was questioned in a committee on Monday, where he lost his temper, shouting at one of the committee members, who he said was who was interrupting him. Let me finish," and he shouted in the end, and that his history. There's clips of him in meetings during COVID with not realizing the mics were still open, being derogatory about colleagues, swearing about colleagues. So in public, he had an unfortunate way of speaking and presenting. But it's the stuff that behind closed doors people were just wondering. But he just wasn't popular, and he just he was quite an unlikable individual, unfortunately.
Thank you, Hugh. For our next story, we have Loch Lomond, and I hope I'm saying this right, the Trossachs National Park will hold the Flamingo Land planning hearing in September. It has been announced that a date has been set for the final decision on controversial proposals for the Flamingo Land mega resort on the shores of Loch Lomond at Balloch. Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park have announced that a planning hearing will be held on Monday, 16th September. At this meeting, the park's board will decide on the application by Yorkshire theme park operator Flamingo Land to build a mega resort featuring 104 woodland lodges, 2 hotels, a water park, a monorail, 372 car parking spaces, shops, and more. The Scottish Green Party have called on the national park bosses to reject the plans and end almost a decade of misery for the local community. The area's Scottish Green MSP, Ross Greer, has led the Save Loch Lomond campaign against the developer's plans since 2016, collecting over 97,000 objections and making this the most unpopular planning application in Scottish history. Ross Greer MSP said, Flamingo Land's destructive plans would scar the world-famous natural landscape, endanger precious wildlife, increase traffic on already dangerously congested roads, and seriously threaten local small businesses. The community have fought against these proposals for almost a decade now, defeating the first application and collecting a record number of objections to the just a moment, sorry. A record number of objections. Let me just find my place again. Yeah. Ballot residents. A record number of objections to this latest version. Now it's time for the board of a national park to stand up for Loch Lomond and for Balloch residents, reject these destructive plans, and end almost a decade of misery for the local community. Objections can still be lodged at www.greens.scot/flamingoland. Huw, what are your thoughts on this situation?
Yeah, I think this is one of those issues, especially in sort of rural areas. We have lots of similar areas in Wales where sort of the local rural economy is dependent to a certain extent on tourism. But as you say, with these large developments, are they in keeping with the surroundings? Are they facilities that that local people will need, and will they create jobs all year round, or is it just something again just to sort of employ people part time in the winter and some full time work in the summer? But it's one of those difficult things. You want to have sort of economic growth and develop these things. But I've been to Flamingo Land many years back outside in Yorkshire, and it's Flamingo Land itself is in quite an unremarkable part of Yorkshire. So it just makes you wonder: is why does it need to be in an area of outstanding beauty when it could be located somewhere outside Glasgow, Edinburgh, where it's more likely to get people visiting. So it's one of those things. If I was seeing some that kind of development happening in Wales, I wouldn't be happy seeing it in parts of the country that are basically beautiful.
Yeah, thanks, you. An all-party Irish Parliament committee calls for the immediate preparations for a united Ireland. An all-party committee of the Irish Parliament has called for preparations for a united Ireland to begin immediately, and called on every government department to examine the implications of constitutional change. The report, which was produced by the Committee on the Implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, has also called on the Irish government to prepare and publish a green paper setting out a vision for a united Ireland. In the first report to be published by the committee, which provides analysis of the current economic relationship between both sides of a border and the potential of an all-island economy. The report shows a major increase in cross-border trade, which has increased from around 2 billion euro in 1998 to some 20 billion euro in 2022. The report also examines the cost of a potential united Ireland and makes the case for planning for a united Ireland to begin. The group, which met 11 times since April of last year, recommended that an Oireachtas committee be set up and resourced and dedicated to the preparations for a united Ireland. It further recommended that preparations for a united Ireland should begin immediately. Chair of a group, Fine Gael TD Fergus O'Dowd called for others to seriously discuss the issues around the possibility of constitutional change. He also said that he hopes the change in the UK government will be a reset of relationships with Great Britain. Independent Senator Francis Black said there is a compelling case for planning for constitutional change. Hugh, how much do you know of the conversation around the United Ireland? Is this something that has support in Northern Ireland? How do people feel about it? And has the constitutional implication of this ever been discussed, say, by UK government or UK Parliament?
Yeah, it's something because obviously the makeup of Northern Ireland has changed from a demographic um, position. You know, I'm going back to I'm sort of old enough to remember the Troubles when they were in their height, and you know the Unionists were sort of the dominant political force. So I think the fact that the Unionists have sort of lost um, a lot of their grip on power and influence. Obviously, Sinn Féin have increased support in Northern Ireland, but also the more sort of non-sectarian parties as well. But it's a direction of travel. You know, you've got independence in Scotland. You know, it's still hovering around the 50-50 mark. I think people in Northern Ireland, I think they're just being realistic and just realizing that it would make sense. And the fact that Northern Ireland, the same as Scotland, voted against Brexit, and yet they're being impacted by it. I think that has a huge impact, and obviously, younger people, as older generations die out, who have more potentially extreme views, having sort of lived through the troubles. I think you're going to have a more liberal populace. But yeah, I think it's interesting. Because when it comes down to it, you can see a government in Westminster having great difficulty, especially with the Good Friday agreement, because as part of the Good Friday agreement, standing against having a vote on unification. Whereas when it comes to Scotland and Wales wanting to discuss independence, it's a different story. So yeah, I think probably I would imagine that we'll see United Ireland before Scotland and Wales are independent. But United Ireland is going to be a catalyst for change in the constitution in the UK as well.
Hmm. Thank you, Hugh. Shifting our focus to the US, where Trump announces J.D. Vance as his running mate. Ex-President Donald Trump announced on Monday that his running mate in the US presidential election is J.D. Vance, a senator from Ohio. In 2016, J.D. Vance was vehemently anti-Trump, stating that he's a never-Trump guy and that you're an idiot if you voted for him. However, Vance states that Trump's performance in office changed his mind on him completely. Vance has even said that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump, and had he been a vice president at the time, he would have done as Trump and his supporters demanded and blocked certification of results in key states won by Biden during the elections weeks earlier. Vance's political outlook is highly aligned with Trump's own views, even being maybe bolder and louder or more extreme by uh, or is seen as more extreme by political commentators in America. The Ohio senator believes in, quote, banning abortion, even in cases of rape and incest, allowing for only occasional exceptions for when the mother's life is at risk. Vance wants to end all funding of Ukraine and was one of the key voices holding up the United States funding packages for the region. He also supports the continued funding of Israel, arguing against the Gaza aid included in those packages. Commenting on what makes the one conflict worth aiding and the other not, JD Vance explains that Israel has achievable conflict goals and Ukraine does not. The two running mates are also aligned on their strong anti-illegal immigration stance, with J.D. Vance often saying how illegal immigration fuels U.S. drug problems and undercuts the value of U.S. labor. Vance presents a problem for the UK government after he called the UK a nuclear-armed Islamist state. Or I believe the quote was that soon to be was the implication of a comment as well. Huw, what does this mean for the Trump election campaign and for the potentially elected Trump and then Vice President Vance?
I think it's clearly worrying. Somebody pointed out today the reason that Trump needed a new running mate for this election was because after the last his last period in office, his supporters tried to kill his vice president.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of makes it quite clear of how the bad the situation is. It's quite interesting because obviously he is Vance has seems to have become incredibly extreme in the last few years. His book, which sort of explains why the workings of man and woman of the USA came to support Trump was because they felt disenfranchised. It's very much like the Reform vote in England and Wales. It doesn't seem to be they're voting for something; they're voting against
Mhm.
things. But no, I think it is worrying. But I think one of the one of the things they seem to have miscalculated is the fact that because he's very similar to Trump, he's unlikely to bring in a different kind of voter, and his viewpoint on abortion is going to make him very unpopular with a certain demographic in the states. But it comes down to mobilization of the votes. I've got some friends in the states, and they're saying that the Trump support. Yes, there is a rump of extreme MAGA crazies like the ones who stormed the Capitol, but the majority of Americans aren't like that. Um, but it is, the fact that Biden is seen as, being infirm and unable to sort of, to lead. That's going to be a critical issue, and I think the assassination attempt over the weekend is going to mobilise people to vote for Trump.
Mhm.
So I think it's going to help him turn his vote out. But as you know, in the states, it just comes down to 6 swing states because the other states you can say what they're going to be, ahead of the election. So it's how those 6 states vote, and as we saw in the last election, it's how the populous, the suburbs and the city areas, and how those groups vote. So it's really important for the Democrats to have a candidate who not only is capable of leading the United States for the next 4 years, but can actually enthuse people to turn out to vote. And I think that's the big issue with Biden, because even there was a poll out today, even after the assassination, that shows Trump is only 1 point ahead. So it
Mhm.
hasn't shifted the dial hugely, but I think it comes down to it is 50-50, but it comes down to who can mobilize the vote. But it does worry me that if Trump does win this time, the fact that they're going to get rid of the civil service, that they're going to put people, sort of basically, party, supporters in positions. It's a very dangerous period of time for America. And even if Trump wins, obviously, he can only serve one more term.
Yeah,
But obviously, Vance is being lined up as his long-term successor. And from what I see, Vance is far more dangerous than Trump because he is intelligent. And,
yeah.
intelligent, mad people are inherently dangerous.
Now, that's obviously just the rules of America saying that Trump can only have one more term. He
Yeah,
hasn't always
and
listened to
it's
those rules, I
highly
suppose.
likely that that's one of the first things they'll try and, or, they're basically going to try and rewrite the
Yeah, I
rule
mean,
book.
you've got a Supreme Court that has ruled that a president can't be tried for criminal acts relating to his position, and you've got a vice president saying he's willing to ignore votes. Well, a potential vice president in wanting, saying he's willing to ignore votes going against the president. So yeah, I guess just keeping it pretty short, you kind of touched on it already there, but I did want to ask you, do you think that a second Trump term would be significantly different from a first? Do you think that this is a man that has sort of, I don't know, learned to play power a little bit more, or is kind of ready to reach out for it a little harder? Do you think that a second
I,
term would be different from first?
yeah, I think it'd be different because obviously the first one uh, is slightly more was chaotic, and what was quite sort of heartening from the first sort of bout of Trump was, despite his clear, sort of incapabilities to do the job, that the behind the scenes things carried on. So the people who were there, who knew what they were doing, carried on doing that. The risk this time is that with Vance, that they want to remove those people, go a step further. So those people who are the sensible ones, who can keep the checks and balances, their voices are going to be diminished quite a lot. So, and I think with situation with Russia, with China, with North Korea, having the biggest economy in the world, the biggest army in the world, having a leadership that is, looking incredibly dangerous from a. Because I think the other thing is that that their logic is, it's not just make America great again; it's forget everybody else. Let's just make sure that
Right.
us Americans are all right. And I think it's that's the danger, is they become more insular,
Yeah.
and they withdraw from sort of global democracy, and who's going to sort of keep sort of Russia in check, Israel, China, North Korea. It just potentially makes the world more dangerous because I can see them becoming more insular and being less interested in foreign affairs.
hmm Thank you, Hugh. For our next story, we've got the Scottish Government in a UN convention on on the Rights of a Child Act coming into force from today. Children's rights will now be at the heart of decision making in Scotland as the United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child (UNCRC) Act comes into force today. The UNCRC Act requires public authorities to protect children's human rights in their decision making when delivering functions conferred by acts of the Scottish Parliament. It allows for children, young people, and their representatives to use the courts to enforce their rights. It aims to mainstream the participation of children and young people in decision making across society, with public services playing a vital role in delivering for children, young people, and their communities. Minister for Children and Young People Natalie Dawn said, "This is a milestone for advancing children's rights in Scotland, delivered by the Scottish Government. We want all young people to grow up loved, safe and respected, and the UNCRC Act aims to do just that. We all have a responsibility to ensure that children and young people are at the heart of decisions that affect them and that they have the confidence and skills to get involved. The Scottish Government is proud that we are the first devolved UK nation to incorporate the UNCRC into law, helping to make Scotland the best place in the world to grow up. Huw, what sort of decisions would this grant children the say over, and what kind of conversations should children play a part in?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and these are the things that I think that the public find it difficult to engage with, but they're really important because obviously sort of young people, we were all young once. The children are our future, so have making sure that children are safe, but making sure that they know that they have a voice and rights is really important. I think where Wales has led the way, we have the Future Generations and Wellbeing Act of Wales that does take in a lot of what the UNCRC sort of discusses. And I think it's important. Um, but what's important as well is how we communicate these things, because there is a danger that people think that what's the point of this? Is it going to change my life? Nanny state. So it's one of those difficult things now to communicating these things, just making sure that people are aware of why they exist and why it's important. But yeah, it's something that that I'd like to see Wales, England, and Northern Ireland adopt as well.
Thank you, Hugh. The Scottish Government announced plans for a sustainable future for Ferguson Marina. Scottish Government ministers have agreed to support new proposals aimed at enabling Ferguson Marina Port in Glasgow, the FMPG, marine ports in Glasgow, to improve productivity and build a sustainable future. As Glen Sannox and Glen Rosa approach completion, the Scottish Government have been working with a company on a long term business plan which positions the shipyard to bid for the secure new work. Up to £14.2 million will be invested over 2 years, subject to the plan passing detailed legal analysis and independent financial and commercial assessment, which should be complete by autumn. Legal advice has confirmed that a direct award of a small vessel's phase 1 contract to the FMPG would introduce substantial risks and uncertainties for both the shipyard and for the communities which rely on the lifeline vessels due to the strict conditions imposed by the UK Subsidy Control Act. Separately, talks are at final stages with BAE Systems about FMPG securing further work on the Type 26 frigate program. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes stressed that delivering productivity improvements and securing commercial contracts were vital components in ensuring the shipyard's long term future. Ms. Forbes said, "Now that Glen Sannox is approaching handover, our focus is on the next phase of FMPG's future. That requires change and investment to target new opportunities. Additional funding goes hand in hand with winning new commercial contracts, and it is extremely good news that talks with BAE Systems to secure further work have reached the advanced stage. We will do everything which is legally possible to support the yard and the workforce to secure a long term future, which is why we have come to an agreement on initiatives and funding to improve productivity. The Scottish Government stepped in to save FMPG in 2019. We did so to preserve jobs and develop the next generation of shipbuilders on River Clyde. That commitment remains unwavering." A spokesperson for BAE Systems said, "We are in advanced negotiations with the company regarding further strengthening our partnership. The placement of additional work subject to agreement of terms and its continued involvement in the program." Hugh, what are your thoughts on new shipbuilding developments?
Yeah, well, as I say, it's one of those stories that has broken out from Scotland into sort of mainstream UK news. I think the two ferries, the Glen Sannox and the what's the other one called? and the other one, it's been a Glen
It's with
Rosa.
Glen
That's it.
Rosa, yeah.
It's been a millstone around the SNP's neck, and it's one of the it's one of the key things that has dragged the SNP down. So hopefully once the two ferries are delivered, and fingers crossed they work efficiently, then it'll help sort of the Scottish government move forward. But it clearly has been an issue for them. It's quite interesting with the tenders for the new electric ferries. I think it's 175 million the contract there, and the fact that the Scottish Government haven't directly awarded that to Ferguson Marine, that's going out to an open tender. Clearly there's been criticism there from sort of the Lib Dems and Alba Party that that they should be supporting Ferguson Marine. But I think with what's happened in the past with the two ferries, I think it's far safer and a better option to be completely transparent with the awarding of any new contracts. But hopefully, once the two ferries are delivered, it'll be the end of a very, very long and very sad saga.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. And on that topic, we move on to the Scottish Government announcing the procurement of new ferries for the Clyde and Hebrides. The procurement of 7 new electric ferries to help support island communities and improve the resilience of the Clyde and Hebrides ferries network is underway. The first stage of a competitive tender process will assess if shipyards interested in bidding for the contract meet the financial and technical criteria to make on the project. Estimated costs for Phase 1 of the Small Vessels Replacement Program are around £175 million for the 7 new vessels, as well as port improvement and shore power upgrades. The invitation to tender for the contract is expected to issue around September 2024, with a view to awarding the contract in March 2025. Cabinet Secretary for Transport Fiona Hislop said, "The Scottish Government is absolutely committed to improving our ferry fleet to better meet the needs of island communities. So I'm very pleased to see the procurement process for 7 new small vessels go underway today. Our intention is that these ferries should be deployed on 7 existing routes, but would also bring benefits to 2 other routes from the redeployment of existing vessels. These 9 routes currently serve around 30% of the car and passenger carryings on the Clyde and Hebrides network. The new vessels will also be electric, helping us to deliver a significant improvement in emissions and local air quality, and taking us forward to lower carbon ferry to a lower carbon ferry network." They went on to say that this procurement is a vital step forward in our plan to improve our ferry services, and I look forward to following its progress closely over the coming months. You tell me about the impact that new vessel programs like this have on the areas that they work in.
Yeah, I think it's really important, sort of the connectivity, especially, in Wales. It's different. We have one sort of large island that is connected to the mainland with by 2 bridges, but even that is an issue now, that the sort of the lack of capacity there. So this kind of transport isn't an issue here, but obviously, in Scotland, where you have so many island communities, and even so communities that are connected to the mainland, it's getting those links beyond those areas is really important. And it's quite exciting, really, when you look at this. The fact that they're going to be commissioning, I think it's 7 electric smaller ferries. But I would imagine that it's something that is filling the SNP government with dread, having to procure, sort of like 7 new vessels that have got the potential to go over budget and sort of late to be delivered. But yeah, no, it's a key part of any sort of infrastructure, and hopefully, like I say, if they can be built, locally, and it's a boost to the economy, but it also developing new skills in electric shipbuilding, which again, would give um, Scotland an edge in that global market that is, it's only going to grow.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hugh. And for our last story, the 2023 Scottish Social Attitude Survey has been published. The findings of a Scottish Social Attitude Survey were published today. The questions covered attitudes to government, the standard of living, the health service, and tax spending and redistribution. On attitudes to the government and the Scottish Parliament. In 2023, 47% of people trusted the Scottish Government to work in Scotland's best interests. This was decreased from 61% in 2019 and is now at its lowest level since the survey began. 21% of people said that they trusted the UK government to work in Scotland's best long-term interests. This was increased from 15% in 2019, but has consistently remained lower than trust in the Scottish Government. Just over a third of people, 35%, think that the Scottish Government was good at listening to people's views before taking decisions. This is a decrease from 51% in 2019. 12% of people thought that the UK government was good at listening to the people's views before taking decisions, which was decreased from 15% in 2019 and has consistently remained lower than the Scottish government figure. The percentage of people who thought that the Scottish Parliament gives ordinary people more say in how Scotland is governed has decreased from 56% in 2019 to 45% in 2023. 46% of people thought that the UK government has the most influence over the way Scotland is run, compared to 43% who thought that the Scottish government has the most influence. 61% of people thought Scottish government ought to have the most influence over the way Scotland is run. On priorities, standard of living, and the health service, when asked to choose the Scottish Government's highest priority should be from the list of options, by far the most popular answer was to improve the economy. This was increased from 23% in 2019 to 42% in 2023. The majority of people, 83%, thought the general standard of living had fallen over the previous year, which is an increase from 2019 when half of people thought the standard of living had fallen. 23% of people said they were satisfied with the way in which the NHS runs, compared to 52% who were dissatisfied. The NHS satisfaction level has fallen from 64% in 2019, and 2023 is the first year since 2005 where more people were dissatisfied than satisfied with the way the NHS runs. 69% of people thought the standard of the health service has fallen over the previous 12 months, which is an increase from 45% in 2019. On tax spending and redistribution, almost half, 47%, of respondents thought the government should increase taxes and spend more on health, education, and social benefits. This has decreased from 55% of the people in 2019. Half of people, 50%, agreed that government should redistribute income from the better off to those who are less well off, while just under a quarter, 23%, disagreed. Parliamentary Business Minister Jamie Hepburn said, "The survey demonstrates continued support for the redistribution of wealth and an increasing desire among people to see the economy grow. This aligns with the Scottish Government's commitments and how we are working hard to provide support to those who need it most." Hugh, how would you imagine opinions and thoughts like this contrasting with overall UK thoughts? And does stuff like this just validate the need for a Scottish government more so than ever?
Yeah, and like I say, because we have a similar survey in Wales conducted annually, but it's clear from those results is that the people feel that they're worse off, that public services are worse than they were before, and I think this is where Labour to a certain extent have benefited because obviously with public services. in Scotland have been, sort of badly hit by sort of Conservative austerity. But yet in Wales, where we have a Labour government, it's been a similar story. So it's clearly not just an administrative issue; it's a structural funding issue. But the trouble is, people, when it comes down to making decisions, they find it difficult to separate the difference between central government in Westminster and how that funding then impacts on devolved governments. And obviously, where the devolved competencies are, there's increased competency in Scotland compared with Wales. But the two big ones, health and education, where the performance isn't great. So the incumbent government is going to feel the impact of that. So it's going to be interesting. So in 2026, it's clear that an opinion poll came out showing that Labour's support in Wales has fallen to like an all-time low. Plaid Cymru are now running second to them for the Senedd elections. So I'd imagine that sort of Reform are up with alongside the Conservatives, both on around sort of 17%. But again, it's a response to the government in Cardiff. So I can imagine there's potential in the Holyrood elections, depending on what happens in the next 2 years in Westminster, whether people in Scotland will punish the SNP for that feeling that their lives aren't as good as they used to be, or whether they're realistic and realise that the issue has been the funding from Westminster. But time will tell. It's one of those complex things. But that's why it's important that people need to be informed about things, because people just read the headlines; they don't actually understand the facts that lie behind the news.
Thank you very much, Huw. And that does wrap us up for the evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you very much. Right now, we must urgently increase our donation if we are to be able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but our income is just over £2,000 a month, and we are now facing mounting debts. Please donate whatever you can. Thanks again to our guest, Huw Marshall, who you can find on Talking Welsh. What was the name of your platform? Talking Wales, yeah. At Talking Wales, and also on your own page. It was lovely having you, Huw Marshall. It's nice talking to you.
Thank you.
And goodbye. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.